Hi, Trojans. So I'm going to start a series based on a presentation I gave last year called 10 Tips for Student-Centered Learning in Any Classroom. Now, when I first created this presentation, we were still in a virtual, completely virtual setting, but a lot of these tips and a lot of these things I'm going to talk about are things that we can carry over in any setting that we're in. So now that we're back face to face, we can still apply learn all of these tips, all of these things, because it really is focusing on the student and not necessarily the setting that we're in. So first, let's just briefly review what teacher-centered learning versus student-centered learning is. So in a more traditional model, a teacher-centered learning approach is where the teacher has the knowledge and is imparting that knowledge onto students. So this is kind of like your typical lecture, where the professor is standing up front, you're taking notes, and that teacher contains the knowledge and you're learning that knowledge directly from that teacher. Now, with the student-centered learning, the student is in the center and is the one that's kind of responsible for the learning. So they're drawing their knowledge from educators across all of the educators that they know, including yourself. They're drawing from their personal or their prior knowledge, from their family, from their peers. They're kind of responsible for kind of having a little bit more personalization in their learning or having a little bit more directed approach in their learning. And so the student is really in the driver's seat for their own learning. And I love this because they are going to be the ones that take accountability for it. There's going to be greater buy-in for their learning, and they really kind of are allowed to have more voice and more options within their own learning. Now, there's a time and place for both types of learning. There are times when lecture style is definitely needed, where you need to give that information to the students. You're the one that has the degree in that field. But I really love student learning approach, and that because you do see a little bit more buy-in if you use it more consistently in your classroom. And also, they're the ones responsible for it. So your role as an educator is to help kind of facilitate their learning, not necessarily to control that learning. So with that, let's jump right into our first tip, and that is our student talk time. So with that, there's some tips for group work that I really love, no matter if you were in a virtual setting or now that we're back face to face. And the first tip is to have regular teams. Now, at first I was a little resistant on this because I want students to be talking to everybody in the classroom, but I really have embraced this idea of having regular teams. For one, in a COVID world, I don't want them to be moving around a whole lot. I want to be able to have control if anything happens, that they're kind of in those groups and then those groups remain consistent. But then also too, it really helps students to kind of get familiar with each other, to get to know each other on a deeper level, so that every time we get into a group work, we can get deeper into the content versus having to get to know each other. Now, I will have them mix up groups probably once every quarter or once every progress report time of having them kind of mix around these groups. But I really love having regular teams, and it's what I've been doing in my classroom so far. And I really see more jumping into content versus just, hi, my name is kind of conversations. The second tip with this is to have clearly established roles. So students should have a purpose of when they're meeting in groups. So do you have a note taker? Do you have a timekeeper? Whatever roles you want to establish for that group work, that they're clearly established. And then this one to me is the most important one, and that is accountability. What product or outcome are you expecting to come out of this conversation? What are students responsible to show you? And so this could be just the conversation themselves. So I like having students record conversations. And so that could be their product or outcome. It could be their note taker or notes afterwards, or how the reflection after their group work. So after they have the discussion, they have a minute to kind of reflect and to kind of write down their thoughts about the conversation. And with that, how are they reflecting on that group time? How can they evaluate themselves to see what role they played in the group, if they were effective in their group or not? There are two note takers here that I really loved from virtual time, and they work just perfectly in face-to-face classrooms too. So even though it says breakout rooms, this is really for group work and group times. So this first one is from Amanda Sandoval and her handle is @HistorySandoval, and she created this really fun breakout room thing. And I love this. I did this when we first get into our groups. I did this at the beginning of the year, and I really like it because it's one, a little bit more fun, like it's visually appealing, but two, the questions that students are asking each other are pretty low stake questions. So they're getting used to how to do the group work, how to talk to each other, or getting used to talking to each other and getting to know each other more. And then the second one was from Hello Teacher Lady, and this was our breakout room note taker. Again, works perfectly in face-to-face classrooms of having those clear established roles. Instead of rooms, these could easily just be groups and can modify there. So you have each group being responsible for that. And then our second one is looking at individual talk time. So not only talking in groups, which I really love, but also making sure that they're being held accountable for speaking individually too. So I like having students not just write down everything, but also sometimes they need to speak and record themselves speaking. Again, I want them practicing using language and academic language out loud as well. So Padlet has a really great built-in feature for this already. So they can do a screencast and show me whatever they're explaining, or they can just record audio, or they can record a vlog, like a video recording of themselves too. And all of that is built in directly into Padlet. And then I can just look at a glance and see all of their responses. And then they can respond written to all of their peers too. So they can do written responses to their peers. So they have to listen to each other speak and then do written responses as well. And then Flipgrid, of course, I can't talk about student talk time without talking about Flipgrid. This was a game changer for me a couple of years ago as a former English teacher and now avid teacher. One of my skills was listening and speaking, and I felt like that was my least used skill or least assessed skill because it's hard to assess speaking and listening unless I was doing a Socratic seminar where we were all talking in one big group, or I was like next to the student talking. I had a hard time assessing that student talk, and Flipgrid really changed that for me. So with Flipgrid, we can record those conversations, record the videos with it. Again, you can have the screencast feature. So I've had students explain their notes to me using Flipgrid. And it could be something as simple as where they're talking individually, so all about me, and then they have to respond to their peers. I also last year turned the Avid tutorials and our TRFs, and I put it on Flipgrid since I didn't want to go into each breakout room. This is a way for me to kind of scaffold what the TRF and the tutorial process was. So they had to explain their TRF and then respond to their peers and kind of go through that academic conversation process, but this in kind of a more individual setting. But now that we're back to face, I love Flipgrid to record group conversations. So often I would have students record their academic conversations in pairs, or if they were speaking in groups, and one person would turn on their Flipgrid and record that conversation. And I really love that because then they can pause if they need to look at their notes. If they messed up, they can go back and redo it. But really holding students accountable for academic conversation. And that is what I am really a big fan of, is having students being able to practice those academic speaking skills, and for me to be able to go back and to kind of offer feedback and tips without having to sit, it's impossible for me to sit next to 9 different groups in my classroom, all who are all speaking at the same time. Now I can listen on my own time and really assess just like I would assess an essay or any other assignment that I'm giving in class. So student talk time is really important in getting students to speak, to practice those academic language skills, and to really, especially now as we're coming back to face-to-face, be able to practice having conversations and collaborating with each other again. So for more tips on our for student-directed learning, I will be putting out I'll put the link to this presentation on in the notes or the comment section below, or the description, I guess. And then I will also be putting, so you can look at any time, but this is turning into a weekly series where I'll be going through these 10 tips. Also want to point out this Padlet here has a lot of resources, so I break it down by the 10 tips. If you have resources, feel free to add to that Padlet as well. All right, Trojans, that's it for this week. Have a great week.